Welcome to day one of the first ever Interpreting Wine WSET Diploma Student Summit. My ambition in creating the series was to connect past graduates with current students, helping to ensure that the knowledge and experience they gained on their way to prize-winning performances was not lost. We kick off with Emily Jago, who was awarded the Wines of Great Britain Prize for Unit 1 Global Business. The current D2 module relates to the Unit 1 case study. She kicks off with her origin story and transition into the world of wine, before discussing her transition through the WSET levels, right through to Diploma Level 4. She talks sources of support during the diploma, gives advice for those preparing for tasting exams during these COVID times, talks transition from Unit 3 to D3, reflects on Unit 1 Global Business, for which she produced the prize-winning performance, before getting into some specifics you can apply in the week before the D3 exam, and indeed in the months before the same exam. Enjoy.
Most of my family has always worked in the wine trade. My grandfather did, and then both my parents, they met in the wine trade as well. So it was kind of, a career that was always possibly on the table for me. And I did my level 2 actually with the WSET just out of interest after I graduated university, because I come from kind of a winey family. My friends always assumed that I could be given the wine list in a restaurant and I'd know what to do. And I actually was like, I have no better idea than anyone else. So I should probably do a level 2. I was like, I should at least know something, right? You just to live up to my name. So I did my level 2 just out of interest and really enjoyed it. I highly recommend it to anyone, even if you're just doing it out of interest. It means you will never ever be frightened by a restaurant wine list again. Mm-hmm. And then after that, I decided I didn't really have any particular plans, and I wanted to try and get a job in hospitality. And I managed somehow to talk my way into a job at Noble Rot's restaurant and wine bar, which is on Lamb's Conduit Street. And they'd been open for about a year when I joined. Mm-hmm. I was taken on as a junior sommelier. What's quite interesting about their team is that they don't necessarily have one sommelier and the rest of the staff are on the waiting team. They employ everyone as a somm. So the idea is that obviously they're such a wine-focused place. You've really got to know your stuff, and hopefully any member of staff you talk to would be able to help you make a delicious wine choice. So it was quite a jump into the deep end of learning about wine. It's like a real crash course year that I was there, tasting everything constantly. You taste every bottle pretty much that's opened in the building. And yeah, it was a really amazing experience. I really loved my time there. After a year, I think I got slightly burnt out. Hospitality is hard, as anyone will attest. And I was quite interested in looking at the supply side of things. So after that, I moved to work for a supplier called Indigo. Indigo Wine, they're a small indie wine supplier working with the on-trade and off-trade. They specialize in Spanish wine, but kind of have a portfolio across the world as well. So I was there for just over a year, which again was a really interesting side, covering shipping, marketing, sales support, all of those things. And after that, I moved to Bibendum Wine, which is where I am now. So I do sales for their on-trade. So I sell to, I'm in the premium team. So I'm kind of working specifically with fine dining, Michelin star restaurants in central London. And I've been doing that for 2 years now. And it's a pretty great job, I've got to say. It's very, very good fun. And I did my level 3. I did while I was at Indigo. I actually failed it first time around because I thought that I could study. I thought I could try and wing the exam while having not really put in the time for the study. And yeah, it didn't go well. So I did it again, managed to pass it. And then decided after a bit of thinking that I wanted to try and do the diploma.
Great to have the the context really of, the roles that you kind of went into, and from my point of view, quite different, but kind of potentially complementary roles. One part of that I would just like to kind of encourage you to delve into a little bit more is that decision to take the diploma in the first place. I guess, in a sense, doing 2 and doing 3, levels 2 and 3 are still time commitments and still a challenge, as you mentioned there. But I think it's quite commonly understood, and I've seen that from my own exploration, that there is a significant step up in terms of the amount of content, the amount of commitment, and even the price of doing that jump from 3 to 4. And I'm just curious, given that you already had those roles and had the sort of family experience, and obviously still had a lot of interest in wine now, which you'd developed, what was it then? Kind of what was the kicker, or what were the sequence of events that made you want to commit to doing the level 4?
It's a good question. I think for me, just my personality type, I think I'm a bit of a box checker. So if I knew that I'd done 2 and 3 and there was 4 just left waiting on the table, I was like, I know that at some point I'm going to do it. But I did delay it for a while because, as you say, it's a huge commitment of time and energy, and it's a marathon. It's 2 years at least of your time, and and financially as well, it's a big commitment. So I think knowing that it was there, and that was, how do I put it? I think knowing that it gives you such a good grounding in wine, it really is the fact that it's the last stepping stone before, if you wanted to go on and do Master of Wine or something like that, it's kind of the top of the tree. And by that stage, I was very committed to pursuing a career of wine. I've been doing it for 4 or 5 years, and I just felt that I'd like to. Everyone always has the intention to read lots of wine books, and I'll study Burgundy in my free time, and but actually, and especially knowing myself, I was like, I'm never going to really delve into studying all of these things unless I'm forced to, unless I've made that commitment. I've got an exam on this day, and I know I've got to do it. And even with the best will in the world, I would never have learned the amount of stuff I've learned doing the diploma just through my own willpower. So I think that was probably the biggest impetus for me. And also I was just curious, I knew people who'd done it. It's a big challenge, and I quite enjoy a challenge sometimes. So about halfway through, I was like, maybe I'm regretting this now, but it was very much worth doing. Yeah.
Great to sort of bring us up to speed in terms of why you wanted to do the level 4 and what you'd hope it would give us. And I think you'll hopefully expand on that as we go forward and talk about the things that it's given you. But one of the things that kind of I guess motivated me to want to do this series to support the present diploma students, and I think one of the things that you said to me when we first spoke, which kind of really, motivated me to want to do it even more, was that, that inference that you would have loved to have this sort of support when you were going through the diploma. And I'm just curious, really, because I think, there's obviously materials, there's recommended tasting, there's all of these things which, I don't think it's really going to be useful for us to go through now because they exist and the WSET will sort of point you towards there. And I'm just curious, looking back now, what was sort of some of the slightly more intangible sources of support, that maybe around motivation or either from companies or from individuals, and was that something that you sort of, I guess, sort of plumbed into your own preparations, i.e., and made sure that you had the sort of support, above and beyond tasting wines and reading books?
Yeah, the wine trade is an incredibly supportive industry, and from my experience, if you ask for help, people are more than happy to help you. I was lucky in the sense that I was already working at a wine supplier. We have an amazing in-house training team, and there's always they run level 3 courses in-house in our offices. So there's always plenty of wines open at the end of most days. So if you say, look, I've got a sparkling exam, I really need just a couple of blind wines, people will do that for you. But also just talking to classmates, talking to industry friends, I set up a couple of little pockets of tasting groups where we'd meet and do blind tastings. And for me, like I said, I'm very lucky that my job involves an awful lot of wine tasting. So that actually, the prep for the tasting exam wasn't my biggest fear. It was actually getting the factual stuff down. But yeah, just creating tasting groups with friends, taste as much as you can. In the run up to the exam, I was staying with my parents and I got them to give me a couple of blind wines every evening, and just really start to hone your palate and start pushing yourself. But to answer your question about resources as well, I did say that when you approached me about this podcast, because I didn't really feel like, I mean, podcasts are such a huge thing now and incredibly useful, because when you're commuting or you're on the train pre-COVID times, that's dead time, and it's quite hard to constantly be reading notes and looking at something. So it would have been great to have something to listen to. There were a few things that a couple of podcasts that I remember looking at. I think the WSET themselves did do a series. I'm not sure if that's been updated now because I haven't looked at it for a year, I'm afraid. But at the time, they did have a couple of deep dives into, I remember listening to one about Napa wines and stuff. So I guess by the kind of stage where you're like a month or 2 months out from the final exam, it's a case of knowing where the holes in the gaps in your knowledge are and trying to plug those holes by looking up specific resources. And there is a lot out there. There's a really supportive online diploma community, because it is a worldwide exam. There are plenty of people who've made lots of notes and kind of set out their way of preparing for the exam, but everyone's different. What works for one person to prepare for it will not be the same as everyone else. Although what I would say is, obviously starting early really makes a difference. You can't, just the sheer load of work, you can't cram for this exam. It's not possible. So it's really just pacing yourself, and little and often is basically the only way I managed to get through it.
Yeah, I think that yeah, as you say, there is so much that's personal, around learning styles, around personality, around working hours, around, if you're a day person, a night person, so many things. But yeah, that might be the kind of only universal truth that you've happened on there. I mean, I've never looked back to an exam or a qualification or anything and wished, I wish I'd started later.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I was working full time when I was studying for it. So for me, the best thing was actually just, I got up an hour and a half earlier than I normally would every day, and just dedicated that first hour of the day to note taking and stuff like that, so that by the time I was a month out from the exam, I had a body of notes that I could then go back to and condense down. But yeah, you've just got to, obviously most people studying for the exam are also working, so it's trying to find that time in your day to slot that in. And if you're lucky enough to work in the wine trade, then you're so immersed in wine all day that really, really does help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and maybe the kind of 2.0 version or the kind of post-COVID version of that I'm seeing out there, is that there are a number of opportunities, I would say, to attend tastings now, where people will actually mail you out, small sample bottles. Unfortunately, we don't have the kind of in-person group tasting, which I would imagine, those free tastings, a huge benefit to a lot of people. But yeah, I mean, at least say the ones I've seen have been paid, but at least, places like 67 Pall Mall, various wine schools, not to sort of, call out one above any other, but, that there are opportunities out there to sort of taste with professionals, and often with, masters of wine, and, people who have got a lot of experience under the belt.
Definitely. And I think I would actually say that for this particular exam, it is, it's very precise in how they want you to taste and how they want you to answer questions. And perhaps talking to wine professionals or doing a general tasting in trade, in general for your wine knowledge, that's a really fantastic resource. But for this particular exam, it is something you can do alone. It is something you can do on a budget. Just going to the supermarket and buying yourself a mixed case of stock varietals, because at the end of the day, they're not going to try and show you in the exam. They're not going to give you a really niche wine that isn't typical of its region or of its grape variety. So, make sure you can spot a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc a mile off. Make sure you can spot the difference between a South African cool climate Pinot Noir and a Burgundy. Really kind of knowing that, and obviously, like, unfortunately, I think it would be probably a bit of Zoom tasting with your classmates if you can manage it. But yeah, I mean, it's a difficult time to try and do it, and I feel very lucky that I managed to prepare for it while we were in a pre-COVID world. But yeah, you can still place your wine orders online and stuff. So
as you've then started talking about what is now called the D3, which I think is the one that keeps people awake at night, probably more than any other, and not least because of the weighting of marks that are kind of on offer there. I think one thing that was particularly interesting, it only really came out today, I was talking, was that your time on the diploma actually straddled and involved a transition from essentially preparing for what you thought was going to be the Unit 3 exam, and then actually taking and passing the kind of new, in inverted commas, D3 version of that. And I'm just super curious, and I think it may help potentially some of those people who are either they're straddling, they're kind of doing the same thing, or they've encountered study materials online for the Unit 3, and maybe they're not entirely sure about, okay, is this still useful? Is this what do I have to adapt from that? And I'm just curious, how did you kind of approach that transition? And how did you then refocus on the D3 rather than the Unit 3?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't intentional. I'd done everything in what was previously the units 1 to 6, Diploma in Wines and Spirits. And because I was meant to do my final Unit 3 exam in May of last year, I decided to defer it for various reasons to October, without really realizing that meant I jumped that bridge into the new format of the diploma, which at the time was a bit of a risk, because when I spoke to the school, they hadn't fully even outlined what the changes were going to be. So it was a bit of a gamble on my part. Now I believe it's fully transitioned to the new format, which does seem to have a lot of improvements and makes it a lot more concise. So that was quite interesting. I think the biggest change is the fact that previously Unit 3 was based all on your own study. Essentially, you had a study guide, told you what to look for, but and you have to use a lot of the online Jancis website, wine dictionary, and things like that. But apart from that, there was a lot of self-research, and that's not easy because the amount of detail required and the amount of sources are online, the amount of conflicting information that can be online when you're really trying to nail down into the details of a particular vineyard or the particular growing habits of a grape variety. If you're looking at conflicting sources and you're trying to collate your own study, that's really hard. So it was a massive advantage to move into the D3 program, where they released in, I think it was about July or August, so a couple of months out from my exam, they released the online textbook, which was still kind of a working thing, and there were amendments. The school was really good at taking feedback from students when they'd say, hey, that doesn't quite match what it says in the Burgundy section, doesn't quite match my study guide. So it was kind of a trial and error period, but it really helped the fact that they were like, just learn this textbook, essentially what's online, that's all you need. And it should always be informed by your own study and clarifying points, reading around other sources. Oxford Companion to Wine is a really important resource there. But yeah, moving over to that was definitely slightly easier for me because everything's in one place. And they also made the decision, I think, to cut out a few wine regions from the syllabus. So previously you did have to study Switzerland, Northern Africa, Georgia. I think quite a few of the smaller, lesser known wine regions were taken out of the syllabus. Whether everyone agrees with that or not, I can't say. But I think the only notable region that isn't included, I don't think it is included in the syllabus for Unit 3, is England as a region, English wine, which is a funny one because it is a fast-growing industry. So maybe they'll include that in the syllabus soon. That is the main thing for the diploma, especially with the final D3 exam, the big one. It's make sure you've got your resources down, make sure you are prepared for the exam in the sense that you know exactly what to expect. Like look at the practice questions. They've got loads of old questions online. Make sure you understand the structure of the exam, the structure of the questions. It would be a real shame if you turned up from the exam having spent 3 days studying Swiss wine and it's not even there anymore. So make sure you've really got quite a clear idea of what you need to know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you might just have that inkling that it's going to come up, and then
exactly,
and then it's nowhere to be seen. Okay, one thing, I think it's interesting for me, and hopefully it'll be interesting for you as well. And you've really, I guess, given a nice segue there in terms of bringing up English wine, because you came on my radar really from the fact that you won an award as part of your diploma studies, and you won that for what is now called the D2 wine business, and very helpfully previously known as the Unit 1 case study. So I'm curious, maybe just to kind of take us back and take yourself back a little bit into, I guess, your approach to that unit, which you've obviously done very well in, and potentially talking equally between the exam but also the case study, which is, as I understand, the part of that unit which is now most relevant for people currently studying the diploma.
That was a nice surprise actually, because frankly I was kind of expecting to scrape through the diploma, so to get an award was really unexpected and really, really great surprise. So for when I did the business module, that was the case study exam. So where they release the question in advance and you are able to plan for, they release the subject in advance and you can plan and prepare. I was really chuffed actually when they released it, because ours was on sherry as a whole region, and you have to be, obviously you're talking about the business, so the history of the region and everything that's involved, while also remembering the viticulture and all of the winemaking side of it as well. I love sherry. I think it's a really fascinating wine and a really interesting region that is quite often overlooked. So I actually really enjoyed the process of researching that. So by the time I came to the exam, I felt like I was pretty happy and confident with the material. But whatever the topic is you get given for the exam, you have the advantage of preparing for it. So talk about it. Tell people. I told all my friends and family, that whether they were interested or not, there's history of this, and this is what was happening in the region in the 60s, and this is how it evolved, and this is the fallout between various bodegas and everything that was involved. So that's one of the nicest exams, I think, because you can prepare ahead of time, and then in the exam it's just a case of keeping a clear head, answering the question, actually reading and answering, not bringing in, I remember this really cool fact, so I'm going to try and just slot that in. And then the other part of it was the coursework, which I'm not sure if that's still included. We had to do a coursework essay. Back when I was doing it, it was still the wine and spirits diploma. So we actually got a question on spirits, which I wasn't really expecting, about the revival of rum as a category, which was quite interesting. I was actually on a wine trip to South Africa at the time, and I'd cut it quite fine to get that essay done. So I was sitting in a really lovely wine estate in the Swartland trying to bash out this essay on rum with my head somewhere completely different. And again, I've actually always preferred coursework to exams, to be honest, because there's less of the pressure. So it's quite interesting reading around it and making sure that you get your referencing right. You make sure you're using credible sources. But yeah, that was really nice. And then to get that prize from Wines for GB, I work with a lot of English wine brands and wine estates in my day-to-day job anyway. And I think it's a really exciting region industry, what we're doing here in the UK. So that was pretty cool. They have such a massive range of companies they partner with who offer the prizes. I went to the January awards ceremony. I didn't actually get to graduate yet, sadly, because it hadn't been processed through the system in time. So I meant to be having my graduation this January, which obviously isn't happening, sadly, due to COVID. But I went to the awards ceremony and got a lovely certificate presented by Stephen Spurrier. And my actual award consisted of a very delicious case of 12 wines from WineGB, so a curated case from a whole range of English wineries, some of which I knew, some of which I didn't. So that was quite interesting. And also a study trip to the vineyards, which hasn't happened yet, sadly, due to COVID.
Yeah, thank you so much for what you've been sharing. I think it will come as a lot of comfort to people who are studying and looking ahead to their exams, and I think maybe a calming voice from somebody who's sort of been there and done that, and has lived to tell the tale. I think will always be quite encouraging. But yeah, I think maybe just that sort of future oriented, relatively broad question. I'm just curious because there are I hope people that will hear this probably about a week or so before potentially their D3 exam or one of the other exams. And I'm just curious, is there anything that you would share for those people who have, sort of in that sort of final week phase, and potentially, the ones who are maybe hearing this slightly ahead of time in that sort of May phase coming up. So I'm just curious, are there things that you would say to somebody sort of 3 months before the exam, and what would you say to somebody that's sort of a week out before the exam?
Yeah. Well, I remember how daunting it is. It really is terrifying, and it did definitely give me a few sleepless nights. It's a big exam and it's not easy. So the commitment of time and kind of pushing through those last few months is to be commended, and keep it up, firstly. I think what I said before about little and often is really important. Make sure you are doing something every day, even if it's just an hour. Have a revision schedule 3 months out, have one 2 months out, have a plan for what you're going to do for your final month, your final week. Really try and map it out and know where you're weak, know where you maybe don't have such a great understanding of the region. I remember thinking that it was really useful to try and study, to say essentially vertically and horizontally. What I mean by that is vertically by country. So you learn France in each of the regions, you learn Italy in each of the regions, and you go across that way. But then horizontally have your headings, if you can visualize, a region, and you go right through history of the region, viticulture, vinification, grape varieties, wine business, famous names and estates to know, the future of the region, and having those categories for each one, you study vertically and you study horizontally, and you make sure that all of those are down. Making it visual. I'm a very visual learner. So for me, my best way of studying, actually, which I did enjoy doing, was getting a huge A3 pad of plain paper and drawing out wine regions. So draw the outline of the region, shading in each of the regions, and making notes around that. And then you can visualize that. You think about, northern Spain, and you've got that image in your head. And then when it comes to 2 weeks before, you maybe start getting post-it notes and sticking them over the regions and condensing that paragraph you've written, again, condense that down into a couple of nuggets, so that hopefully the week of the exam or a couple of days before the exam, you can maybe have a couple of note cards with literally just trigger words on it that will then set off that spiral of what you remember about the region. In terms of the actual week of the exam, it was just kind of refreshing going back over things. I took some little note cards to the exam with me, so I could just glance at them on the way, just in case I got in and I was like, I can't remember what this, what are they growing in the Barossa Valley? I don't know. And having that down. But what's the other thing I was going to say? I wrote quizzes for myself. That was quite a good way of doing it. As I was studying a region, writing notes with all the information in front of me, I just jot down questions, something that I knew was hard and I knew I'd forget. I'd write that question down, and then I'd give that piece of paper to my friend and say, ask me these questions. And that kind of self-testing, going back over it again, just find loads of different ways of studying it. And I think for me, actually, funnily enough, the regions that normally scare people to study, like Germany, German wine law is complicated, and actually, in a way, they're the easiest because they're very systematic. You can draw out pyramids, you can draw out structures, you can learn the VDP rules. It's quite solid actually in how it's structured. It's very ordered. So countries like that is relatively easy to study. For me, it was actually the New World, learning Chile and Argentina. They're great expanses of, whereas in Burgundy, you're literally nailing it down to individual cru and individual villages. there you've got, you're learning these valleys, and there's a lot more about the climate influence there, especially, knowing the mountain ranges along the coast and knowing where the fog gets funneled and how that affects that particular valley. It can get quite muddled. So for me, having those maps was really important. And also, if you are 3 months out from the exam, the other thing I'd say is don't neglect the wine business side of it. I remember in my D3, I had a question about the Loire Valley, and I fell down a bit on my soil types. I got a bit muddled. I didn't necessarily get that right. But the thing that kind of saved that essay question for me and meant that I got a good mark on that question in the end was the fact that at the end, I was able to write a really good page about kind of where Loire Valley wines had gone through upward and downward trends, where they were popular, when they were selling well in Paris, when they weren't, why they have a certain image in the market. And that's the interesting bit. That's the bit you can actually talk to people about. They might not be that interested in soil types, but you can talk about why certain wines are popular or why they aren't, and that's a really important bit, just to make sure you have a little something you can say for the business and apply that knowledge to the current market, because that really is where you can pick up points. I remember someone saying to me, don't chuck away the easy marks as well. It sounds really silly, but when you read a question and they're like, can you please talk about Vouvray? Remember to say, this is a white wine. Like, it sounds really basic, but like, this is a still white wine from the Loire Valley in this, in this area of France, and this is the grape it's made from. It's so easy to kind of jump straight into, what's the appellation and what's the soil, and can I remember this climatic influence, and what's the training technique they use there in the vineyards, and just take a deep breath, pause before you answer the question and go, what is it? It's a white wine. Okay, start from there, and kind of bullet point it.
The way you were talking there, it just felt like, it was a really, what I would call a whole-brained approach. It was like you were basically giving yourself so many different hooks there that I love the statement that you said. It was like, one of those words will just sort of set off the spiral of things that you know about it, basically. And it's like, it's just giving yourself as many routes into that spiral, basically, and just making the target bigger, just making it easier for yourself, which, as I said, will help a lot of people, really do.
You're trying to cram a lot of facts into your head. At the end of the day, it's a lot of factual recall, and hopefully you can rely on yourself in the exam to be able to write a coherent sentence and string it together. But it's a lot of facts you're trying to learn, and it is daunting. So whatever works for you, I guess, but just making sure that you can really engage with it, that it really comes alive for you. Wine is a living thing, and if you have a career in wine, or if you want to pursue a career in wine, it will really help you. Even the things that you think seem, they're not your favorite thing to study, the things that seem boring or complicated now, it's knowledge that it stays in your brain somewhere.
Thank you so much to Emily for sharing all of your advice. I love so much of what you share, but I really think the point you made about using what you have to hand in the supermarkets where you live will help people anywhere in the world to prepare for the tasting components. What also stood out for me were your thoughts on starting from the very basics when answering an exam question, and I believe taps into that universal truth that the examiners are looking for opportunities to give you credit for your knowledge, so make everything that you know about the wine explicit. If you're following on the Summit webpage, do see below for the timestamps that will let you navigate to any part of Emily's episode. And if you're listening on your podcast and would like full access to the Summit materials, please visit interpretingwine.com/summit today. If you know someone who would find this episode useful, do please share the direct link, which is interpretingwine.com/438. And if you found it really useful, then please leave the episode an iTunes review on the same link. Next time on the WSET Diploma Student Summit, I speak with double award winner Tatiana Livesey. See you then.